My wife went on a business trip against my wishes, so I tracked her down, served her divorce papers, destroyed her lover, and vanished without trace. 5 years later, I got shocking news about my wife. But before I begin, please like and subscribe to the channel. And we'd love to hear which part of the world are you joining us from. Let us know. Now let's dive into today's story. Grant Holloway had always believed that marriage was about noticing. Not the grand gestures or the anniversary dinners, but the small shifts. The way Dana used to touch his shoulder when she passed behind his chair. How she'd ask about his quarterly reports even when her own deadlines were crushing her. The specific way she laughed at his jokes. Genuine, not performative. All of it stopped. Not suddenly. That would have been easier to pinpoint, easier to confront. Instead, it faded like ink left too long in sunlight. One day, Grant realized he couldn't remember the last time she'd asked how his presentation went, or suggested they try that new restaurant downtown, or fallen asleep with her head on his chest while they watched television. Their split-level house in Maple Glen, Ohio, sat on a quiet street where the neighbors waved but didn't intrude. The kind of neighborhood where people mowed their lawns on Saturday mornings and complained about property taxes over backyard fences. Grant had chosen it for exactly that reason. Stability, predictability, peace. He stood in the kitchen now, late afternoon light cutting through the window above the sink. The coffee maker gurgled, filling the silence. Dana's mug sat in the dishwasher, still stained from her morning espresso. She'd rushed out early for a strategy meeting that wasn't on their shared calendar. Grant pulled out his phone and opened the app they'd used for 5 years. Their entire life had been synchronized there. Doctor appointments, social events, work travel, even grocery lists. Dana had insisted on it when they got married. "We're a team," she'd said. "Teams communicate." The calendar was mostly blank now. Her entries had disappeared 3 months ago, replaced with vague blocks of busy that told him nothing. He set his phone down and picked up his coffee. The liquid was hot enough to hurt, but he drank it anyway, welcoming the distraction. When Dana came home that evening, she moved through the house like a stranger passing through a hotel lobby. Her heels, expensive, new, not the practical ones she used to wear, clicked against the hardwood. She dropped her purse on the counter without looking at him. "How was your day?" Grant asked. He kept his voice level, curious, not accusatory. "Fine." She opened the refrigerator, stared at its contents without pulling anything out, then closed it again. "Yours?" "Productive. Finished the budget analysis for next quarter." "That's good." The conversation died there. Dana pulled out her phone, her thumb moving rapidly across the screen. Her expression shifted, a small smile, quickly suppressed. She angled the phone away from him, a movement so subtle he might have missed it if he weren't paying attention. Grant had become very good at paying attention. "I'm going to take a shower," Dana said, already moving toward the stairs. "Want me to order dinner?" "I ate already." Strategy meeting ran late. She was upstairs before he could respond. Grant stood in the kitchen, listening to the water run through the ceiling. He thought about the Dana he'd married. The woman who'd been so hungry for success she worked 18-hour days, who'd called him from parking lots just to hear his voice, who'd said that building a life with him was the smartest decision she'd ever made. That Dana had wanted a partner. This Dana wanted something else. He pulled out his laptop and opened their bank statements. Nothing unusual. Joint checking, savings, investment accounts, all normal. Their credit cards showed the expected charges. Groceries, gas, her business lunches, his occasional book purchases. But then he noticed something. A consulting expense filed under Strategic Development Solutions. The amount was modest, $1,200. He clicked through to the receipt. The vendor name was different from any they'd used before. He opened another tab and searched for the company. The website was generic, the kind of placeholder site that said nothing about what the company actually did. Grant wrote down the name and the date. 2 weeks later, he found another charge. Different vendor name, same amount, same vague category. He didn't confront her. Not yet. Confrontation required certainty, and Grant believed in thorough research. It was what made him good at his job, what had built their financial stability while Dana chased promotions and corner offices. Instead, he watched. Dana announced the Minneapolis trip on a Tuesday evening. She'd made salmon, overcooked, distracted, and they sat across from each other at the dining table they'd picked out together at an estate sale in Columbus. "It's mandatory," she said, cutting her fish into precise squares. 3-day conference. Vendors, stakeholders, the whole executive team. When? Grant asked. "Next week. Wednesday through Friday." That's short notice. It came up fast. She didn't look at him. "You know how corporate is?" Grant nodded. He knew exactly how corporate was. Dana had complained about their disorganization for years, how they planned major events months in advance, how she'd always had at least 6 weeks' notice for anything requiring travel. "Do you need a ride to the airport?" he asked. "I'll take an Uber. Early flight. Have a safe trip." Dana's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She glanced up, searching his face for something. Whatever she was looking for, she didn't find it. "Thanks." That night, after Dana fell asleep, Grant lay awake listening to her breathe. The rhythm was wrong. Too fast, too shallow. The breathing of someone whose mind wouldn't quiet. He thought about 5 years of marriage. The way Dana had always wanted more. Not more from him, exactly. Just more. More recognition at work. More zeros on her salary. More people knowing her name when she walked into a room. Grant had understood that ambition, even admired it. He'd built the foundation that let her chase those heights. But ambition was one thing. Deception was another. The next morning, after Dana left for work, Grant called in sick. He didn't call often, maybe twice in the last 3 years, so his supervisor didn't question it. Grant spent the day in his home office, door closed, curtains drawn. He started with their expense reports, going back 6 months. Dana had always been meticulous with documentation, a trait that served her well in corporate finance. But meticulousness could become predictability, and predictability created patterns. The consulting expenses appeared monthly. Different vendors each time, but always the same amount, always categorized the same way. None of them appeared in any company directory he could find. None of them had legitimate business registrations in Ohio. Grant pulled up Dana's work calendar from their shared account. The one she'd forgotten she'd given him admin access to years ago. The Minneapolis conference existed. It was real, but Dana had added another event to her personal calendar, one that didn't sync with his. He could see it only because he'd logged in directly through her account. Dinner with Trevor. 7 p.m. Lucia's. Trevor. Grant opened LinkedIn. Dana's connections loaded slowly. He scrolled through familiar names, colleagues, former classmates, professional contacts. Then he found it. Trevor Mallory, Regional Sales Director at North Point Distribution. Recently divorced, according to a post from 4 months ago where he'd written some philosophical nonsense about new beginnings. His profile picture showed a man in his early 40s, gym fit, wearing a suit that cost more than it should have. His posts were frequent and loud. Motivational quotes, humble brags about sales numbers, shares of articles about leadership with his own commentary attached. Grant clicked through Trevor's activity. Among the comments and likes, he found Dana. She'd engaged with a dozen of his posts in the last 3 months. Nothing inappropriate in the comments themselves, just professional pleasantries, congratulations on deals closed, agreement with his perspectives on market trends. But then Grant noticed the timing. Dana had liked a post from Trevor at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday. She'd commented on another at 6:15 a.m. on a Saturday. These weren't casual workplace interactions. These were notifications she was waiting for. Grant sat back in his chair. The office felt smaller suddenly, the walls closer. He'd built this room himself, installed the bookshelves, painted it the soft gray Dana had chosen. She'd brought him sandwiches while he worked, teased him about his perfectionism when he measured twice and cut once. When had that version of him disappeared? He pulled up their phone records. Dana's number showed dozens of calls to one particular contact. The calls were short, 5 minutes, 3 minutes, 8 minutes. Quick conversations, the kind you had when you couldn't talk long, when you were checking in, making plans, coordinating. Grant cross-referenced the number. It belonged to Trevor Mallory. He stood and walked to the window. Outside, Mrs. Patterson was pulling weeds from her flower bed. Her husband was washing their car, spraying water that caught the afternoon sun. Normal people doing normal things, unaware that across the street, Grant's world had just inverted. He wasn't angry yet. Anger required emotion, and emotion required him to accept that this was real. Instead, he felt a strange clarity, like the moment before a storm when the air pressure changed and everything became sharply focused. Dana wasn't having an affair. She was planning something bigger. Grant waited until the night before Dana's Minneapolis trip. She'd already packed, her suitcase sitting by the door, ready for the early Uber. She was in the bathroom, washing her face, when Grant retrieved the spare phone from the back of her nightstand drawer. He'd found it 2 weeks ago while looking for the warranty information on their mattress. It was cheap, prepaid, the kind of device you bought when you didn't want to trail. Dana had been careful. She'd turned it off, hidden it under old instruction manuals and forgotten birthday cards. But she'd forgotten to erase it first. Grant turned it on. No passcode. That was Dana's first mistake. Her second was thinking Grant wouldn't look. The messages loaded. He scrolled past the first few, confirming dinner times, discussing which hotel, until he found what mattered. Trevor, we move the accounts after Q3. You set up the routing, I'll handle the client notifications. Dana, and if Grant notices? Trevor, he won't. You said he barely looks at the detailed statements. Dana, he doesn't. He trusts me. Trevor, then we're fine. 6 months, and we're set. Grant read the messages twice, then a third time. Each word settled into place like pieces of a puzzle he hadn't realized he'd been assembling for months. This wasn't an affair. Or rather, it wasn't just an affair. Dana and Trevor were moving money, his money, their money, into accounts Grant didn't control. They were planning to drain the joint accounts, probably transfer assets, maybe even file fraudulent expense claims to cover the gaps. Grant set the phone down carefully. His hands were steady. That surprised him. He'd expected trembling, fury, the hot rush of betrayal. Instead, he felt cold, precise. The same way he felt when he found an error in a budget report, when numbers didn't balance, and he had to trace backward to find where the mistake originated. Dana came out of the bathroom, face clean, hair pulled back. She looked younger like this, more like the woman he'd married. You're quiet tonight, she said, climbing into bed beside him. Tired, Grant said. Big project wrapping up. She nodded, already reaching for her real phone, scrolling through something. I'll try not to wake you when I leave in the morning. Have a good trip. Dana glanced at him, that same searching look from before. You're being weird. How so? I don't know. You're too okay with everything. Grant turned toward her, letting his expression soften. We've been married 5 years, Dana. I trust you. Something flickered in her eyes. Guilt, maybe. Or satisfaction. She kissed his cheek. Get some sleep. She turned off her light, and within 20 minutes her breathing had evened out. Grant lay awake, planning. He took a personal day on Thursday. Told his supervisor he had a family emergency in Minnesota and might be unreachable. He booked a flight to Minneapolis using a credit card Dana didn't know about. He'd opened it years ago for business expenses and never closed it. The paper trail wouldn't connect to their joint finances. Grant packed light. 1 carry-on, 2 changes of clothes, his laptop. He left his wedding ring on the bathroom counter. Not as a symbol, but because symbols were meaningless now. This was about documentation, evidence, clarity. The flight was smooth. Grant sat in a window seat and watched Ohio disappear beneath clouds. He thought about the house they'd bought together, the mortgage they'd carefully structured, the retirement accounts they'd built. Dana's name was on everything. He'd insisted on that because marriage meant partnership, and partners shared equally. Apparently, Dana had taken that lesson to heart. She just decided to share it with someone else. Grant landed in Minneapolis at 2 in the afternoon. The conference hotel was downtown, a modern building with too much glass and marble. He didn't check in. Instead, he sat in the lobby cafe, ordered coffee he didn't drink, and waited. Dana appeared at 6:30. She wore her power suit, navy blue, tailored, the one she saved for presentations to executives. Her hair was styled, makeup flawless. She crossed the lobby with purpose, heels striking marble, and didn't notice Grant sitting 15 feet away behind a pillar. Trevor met her at the elevator. He was exactly what Grant had expected, tall, confident, wearing a smile that said he'd never faced a real consequence in his life. He touched Dana's lower back as they stepped into the elevator together. Grant waited 10 minutes, then followed. The hotel restaurant was on the second floor. He watched through the glass doors as they were seated at a corner table, away from the main crowd. They ordered wine. They leaned close. Dana laughed at something Trevor said, the laugh Grant used to hear across their dining table. He didn't need to see more. He'd already seen everything that mattered in those text messages. Grant returned to the lobby. At the front desk, he asked for Dana Holloway's room number. "I'm sorry, sir. We can't give out guest information," the clerk said, polite but firm. "I'm her husband. I flew in to surprise her." The clerk hesitated. Grant kept his expression earnest, slightly embarrassed, the face of a romantic gesture gone awkward. "Room 847, the clerk finally said. "But she's at dinner right now." "Perfect. I'll wait." Grant took the elevator to the 8th floor. He stood outside room 847 for a moment, listening to the silence, then returned to the lobby. He brought divorce papers. He prepared them 3 days ago with an attorney in Columbus who specialized in asset protection. The papers were simple, direct, irreconcilable differences, division of assets to be determined, immediate legal separation. Grant had the clerk call Dana's room and leave a message that she had a package at the front desk. Then he waited. Dana appeared 20 minutes later, Trevor beside her. They were holding hands. When they reached the desk, Grant stepped forward from the seating area. "Hello, Dana." She froze. Color drained from her face. "Grant? What are you? I brought you something." He held out the envelope. Large manila, sealed, with her name, typed across the front. Dana didn't take it. Trevor stepped closer, protective instinct kicking in. "Who the hell are you?" "Her husband," Grant said, not looking at him. "Dana, take the envelope." "Grant, please, let's talk about this." "I'm not here to talk. I'm here to deliver papers. They've already been filed with the court in Franklin County. You've been served." Dana's hands shook as she finally took the envelope. People in the lobby were starting to notice. A couple near the fireplace glanced over. The desk clerk had stopped typing. "You're embarrassing me," Dana hissed, stepping closer, voice dropping. Grant met her eyes. "No, I'm documenting you." Trevor finally found his voice. "Look, man, I don't know what your problem is." "You," Grant said, finally turning to face him. "You're next." Trevor tried to straighten, to look threatening. It might have worked if Grant had been angry. But anger was wasteful, and Grant had moved past waste. "You should stop," Trevor said, the confidence in his voice manufactured. Grant smiled, not broadly, just a slight curve of his lips, the expression someone makes when they know a punchline the other person hasn't heard yet. "You already did. You just don't know it yet." He walked past them, through the lobby, out into the cool Minneapolis evening. Behind him, he heard Dana's voice rise, then cut off. Someone, probably hotel staff, was intervening, asking everyone to keep their voices down. Grant got into a taxi and went straight to the airport. There was a late flight back to Columbus. He bought a ticket at the gate and sat in the terminal, watching planes take off into darkness. Dana called 17 times before he boarded. He didn't answer. She left voicemails, anger first, then bargaining, then panic. He deleted them all without listening. When Grant landed back in Columbus after midnight, he drove home through empty streets. The house was dark, exactly as he'd left it. He went inside, locked the door, and sat at the kitchen table. Then, finally, he allowed himself to feel. Not grief, not betrayal, relief. He'd been carrying the weight of Dana's lies for months without realizing it. Every forced smile, every deflected question, every night lying awake wondering what had changed. All of it had been building pressure, distorting his reality. Now the truth was out in the open, and the truth was clarifying. Grant slept that night for the first time in weeks. Deep, dreamless sleep. When he woke Friday morning, the real work began. Grant had learned long ago that destruction required patience. Quick vengeance was satisfying emotionally, but ineffective practically. The people who got caught were the ones who acted from anger, who made noise, who wanted their targets to know they were being hunted. Grant wanted something different. He wanted inevitability. He spent Friday organizing files. Every text message between Dana and Trevor, photographed, and backed up in 3 locations. The consulting expenses cross-referenced with company policies and financial regulations. The phone records, time-stamped and annotated. The spare phone itself, sealed in a plastic bag with a printed chain of custody document, stored in his safety deposit box at the bank. Evidence wasn't about volume. It was about coherence. A story that explained itself without requiring interpretation. Trevor's story was already written. Grant just needed to make sure the right people read it. He started with Trevor's LinkedIn profile. It took 2 hours to map Trevor's professional network, current colleagues, former employers, clients he'd bragged about landing in his posts. Grant made a spreadsheet. Names, companies, email addresses, relationships. Then he began researching Trevor's work history. North Point Distribution had solid reviews, decent financials, nothing scandalous. But Trevor himself had moved between companies every 2 to 3 years. For jobs in 12 years. Always lateral moves, always leaving before promotion cycles. That was interesting. Grant pulled annual reports, looking for patterns. At Trevor's previous company, an accounts receivable audit had occurred 6 months after Trevor left. Nothing actionable had come of it, but the timing was notable. Before that, Trevor had been employed at a regional distributor that went bankrupt 18 months after his departure. The bankruptcy filing mentioned inventory discrepancies, but blamed broader market forces. Individually, these were coincidences. Together, they suggested someone who knew how to exit before consequences arrived. Grant dug deeper. He filed public records requests for any legal disputes involving Trevor's name. There were 2. Both settled out of court. Both involved contract disagreements with former employers. The amounts weren't disclosed, but the complaints hinted at unauthorized commissions and misrepresented sales figures. Trevor Mallory was exactly what he appeared to be, a man who cut corners and convinced himself it was strategy. Grant compiled everything into a portfolio. 32 pages, indexed, with supporting documentation attached. He didn't editorialize. He didn't need to. The facts built their own narrative. Then he waited. Dana returned from Minneapolis on Saturday. Grant heard the Uber pull up, heard her key in the lock, heard her suitcase wheels on the hardwood. Grant! He was in his office, door open. He didn't answer. Dana appeared in the doorway. She looked exhausted. Her makeup was smudged, her suit wrinkled. She'd been crying on the plane. Probably. People did that when they realized mistakes had consequences. "We need to talk," she said. "We don't." "Grant, please. I can explain." "You can't." He kept his eyes on his laptop screen, reviewing a file. Explanation requires complexity. What you did was simple. Dana stepped into the office. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think. You and Trevor Mallory were planning to move assets from our joint accounts into structures I don't control. You were building a parallel financial life. You got caught." She flinched. "I wasn't going to actually. The text messages say otherwise. You went through my phone? Your spare phone. The one you kept in our nightstand. The one without a passcode." Grant finally looked at her. "You underestimated me, Dana. You always did." Her face crumpled. "I made a mistake. I know that. But we can fix this. We can go to counseling. We can—" "I filed for divorce. The papers were delivered to you in front of witnesses. It's done. You humiliated me. I documented the timeline. There's a difference." Dana's expression hardened. "You think you're so smart. You think you've won. I think I protected myself." She laughed, bitter and sharp. "From what? From me trying to have something of my own? You've controlled everything for 5 years, Grant. The house, the money, the decisions. I just wanted—" "You wanted to steal." Grant's voice stayed level. "Call it whatever makes you feel better, but that's what it was. Theft." Dana turned and walked out. She went upstairs. Grant heard drawers opening, clothes being thrown into bags. She was packing. Good. He'd already changed the locks on the house. New keys would arrive Monday. He'd consulted with his attorney about legal separation procedures. Dana could stay through the weekend, but after that, she'd need to find somewhere else. She came downstairs an hour later with 2 suitcases. "I'm going to my sister's." "Okay. That's it? Just okay?" Grant stood, walked to the door, opened it for her. "What did you expect?" Dana stared at him. "I expected you to care." "I did care. Past tense. She left without another word. Grant closed the door, locked it, and returned to his office. Now, came the interesting part. Grant didn't send the portfolio to North Point Distribution immediately. That would have been too obvious, too traceable. Instead, he waited 2 weeks. He let Dana settle at her sister's place. He let Trevor relax, thinking the threat in Minneapolis had been empty posturing. Then Grant created an anonymous email account. He used a VPN, routing through servers in 3 different countries. The email was simple. To whom it may concern, at North Point Distribution. The attached documentation raises questions about compliance violations and potential financial irregularities involving one of your regional directors. As a concerned industry professional, I felt obligated to bring this to your attention. All information has been verified through public records and official sources. Please conduct your own investigation. The documents speak for themselves. He attached the portfolio as a PDF. Click Send, then deleted the email account. The message went to North Point's ethics hotline email, publicly listed on their website, monitored by corporate compliance. Grant went to bed that night and slept perfectly. The investigation took 3 weeks. Grant knew because he'd set up a Google alert for Trevor's name and North Point Distribution. The first ping came on a Thursday afternoon. A small industry newsletter mentioned that North Point was conducting an internal audit of regional sales procedures. The second ping came 6 days later. Trevor Mallory had been placed on administrative leave pending investigation. Grant allowed himself a small moment of satisfaction. The third ping arrived Monday morning. Trevor Mallory's employment with North Point Distribution had been terminated, effective immediately. But Grant wasn't finished. He sent modified versions of the portfolio to 2 of Trevor's biggest clients, companies whose names Trevor had dropped in his LinkedIn posts, companies where Trevor had supposedly built unbreakable relationships. The emails came from different anonymous accounts, routed through different VPNs. The subject line was always the same: due diligence concerns regarding former representative. One client didn't respond. The other forwarded the email to North Point's legal department, asking why they'd been working with someone whose professional conduct was questionable. North Point stock dipped slightly that week. Not enough to make headlines, but enough to irritate their board of directors. They issued a statement about strengthening compliance procedures and reviewing vendor relationships. Trevor's name disappeared from LinkedIn 3 days later. His profile, his posts, his network all gone. Grant imagined him sitting in some apartment, staring at his phone, watching everything he'd built evaporate. Grant felt nothing about it. No satisfaction, no guilt, just completion. Dana tried to contact him twice. The first time was a phone call he didn't answer. The second was an email sent late at night, the kind of message people write when they're drinking and feeling sorry for themselves. Grant, I know you won't believe this, but I never wanted to hurt you. I just felt trapped, like I was drowning in our life and nobody noticed. Trevor made me feel seen again. He made me feel like I mattered. I know what we did was wrong. I know I can't fix it. But please don't destroy my career over this. Whatever you're planning, please just stop. I'll give you whatever you want in the divorce. I won't fight you on anything. Just stop. Please. Dana. Grant read it once, then moved it to a folder labeled Evidence, Personal Communications, and forgot about it. He wasn't destroying Dana's career. She'd done that herself the moment she decided to falsify expense reports and plan to move joint assets without consent. Grant was simply making sure the right people knew about it. The internal audit at Dana's company started 5 weeks after Grant served the divorce papers. He knew because Dana's sister called him, angry and accusing. What did you do? She demanded. Dana's being investigated at work. They're going through every expense she's filed for the last 2 years. She thinks you reported her. I didn't report anyone, Grant said, which was technically true. He'd simply sent an anonymous package to the company's CFO, copies of the consulting expenses, cross-referenced with vendor searches showing those companies didn't exist, time-stamped to match the months when Dana had claimed business travel. You're destroying her life. No, Grant said. I'm just not protecting her from the consequences of her own choices. Dana's sister hung up. Grant deleted the call from his history. 2 weeks later, Dana was placed on probation pending investigation. She was required to submit detailed documentation for every expense claim from the previous 3 years. Her corporate credit card was suspended. Her travel privileges were revoked. Grant imagined her sitting in some HR office, trying to explain why $1,200 had been paid to companies that didn't exist, trying to maintain composure while knowing everything was unraveling. He felt the same thing he'd felt when Trevor was terminated. Nothing. Dana's emails became more frequent, more desperate. You're ruining me. I lost Trevor. I'm losing my job. What more do you want? Please, Grant. We loved each other once. Doesn't that mean anything? Grant didn't respond to any of them. Words were just noise now. The only communication that mattered was legal documentation, and his attorney handled all of that. The divorce proceedings moved forward. Division of assets, separation of accounts, filing of financial disclosures. Dana tried to claim half of everything: the house, the retirement accounts, the investments. Grant's attorney countered with evidence of attempted fraud, breach of fiduciary duty in marriage, misappropriation of shared resources. Dana's attorney tried to negotiate. Grant's attorney declined. "My client is prepared to go to trial," she said during one mediation session Grant didn't attend. Every text message, every falsified expense, every communication with Trevor Mallory will become public record. Are you prepared for that? Dana settled 3 days later. She got 20% of the liquid assets and walked away from everything else. The house, the retirement accounts, the investments, all Grant's. She signed the papers on a Wednesday afternoon. Grant wasn't there. He was at work, finishing a budget analysis, when his attorney called. "It's done," she said. "You're officially separated. Divorce will be final in 6 months." "Thank you." "Grant, I have to ask. What she did was wrong, but the way you dismantled her life, are you okay with that?" Grant thought about the question. Was he okay with it? "She made choices," he said. "I just made sure those choices had consequences. That's not revenge. That's accountability." His attorney was quiet for a moment. "All right, I'll send you the final documents." Grant hung up and returned to his spreadsheets. Numbers didn't lie. They didn't cheat. They didn't betray. They simply existed, neutral and constant. He found that comforting. 3 months after the settlement, Grant received a letter at his office. No return address, handwritten envelope. Inside was a single page, messy handwriting, words scratched out and rewritten. "Grant, you probably won't read this, but I need to say it anyway. I know what I did. I know I hurt you. I know I destroyed what we had. But what you did in response, it's worse. You didn't just end our marriage. You ended my career. You ended Trevor's career. You systematically destroyed 2 lives because you were angry. That's not justice. That's cruelty. I don't expect you to care. I don't expect you to feel guilty. But I want you to know that what you did wasn't noble. It wasn't righteous. It was revenge, pure and simple. And someday you're going to have to live with that. I hope it was worth it. Dana." Grant read the letter twice. Then he took it to the shredder beside his desk and fed it through. The blades chewed the paper into thin strips that fell like confetti into the bin. Dana was wrong about one thing. He was already living with it, and he slept perfectly at night. Grant had expected Dana to disappear after the divorce. Most people did. They took their share of the settlement, moved to a new city, started fresh somewhere the old shame couldn't follow them. Dana wasn't most people. She tried to save herself. Grant learned about it from his attorney, who received a letter from Dana's new legal representation. Dana was claiming Grant had orchestrated the entire situation, that he'd pressured her into the relationship with Trevor, that he'd encouraged the financial planning, that he'd manipulated everything so he could file for divorce and keep the assets. It was creative. Grant had to give her credit for that. "She's requesting a review of the settlement," his attorney said over the phone. "She claims coercion and fraud. She wants the court to void our agreement and reopen negotiations." Can she do that? She can try, but she need evidence. Right now, it's just accusations. Grant thanked her and hung up. Then he went to his safety deposit box. 3 years earlier, 2 years into his marriage, Grant had done something that seemed paranoid at the time. He'd created a sealed affidavit detailing the state of their marriage, their financial arrangements, and his concerns about Dana's increasing secrecy around work. He'd had it notarized, time-stamped, and stored with third-party documentation of all their shared accounts and assets. It was insurance, the kind you hoped never to use. Grant had taken the affidavit to a separate attorney, one who didn't handle the divorce. He'd paid her to hold it in escrow with instructions. If anyone ever accused him of fraud or financial manipulation in his marriage, this document was to be released to the court. Dana's new allegations triggered exactly that. Within a week, the affidavit was submitted to the court. It showed everything. Grant's documentation of normal marital finances up until 18 months ago, his concerns about Dana's behavior changes, his notes about discovering irregularities, his decision to separate legally before things escalated. The document proved he'd been preparing for this possibility long before he knew about Trevor. It proved he'd been protecting himself from exactly what Dana was now trying to do. The investigators didn't just clear him. They thanked him for his cooperation and turned their full attention to Dana. The arrest happened at her work. Grant heard about it from a former colleague of Dana's who still sent him occasional emails. They'd been friendly during the marriage, and apparently she felt obligated to keep him informed. Thought you should know, Dana was arrested this morning. Security walked her out in handcuffs. Nobody knows what for yet, but there are rumors about embezzlement. Grant didn't respond. He already knew what the charges would be. Falsifying expense reports, misappropriation of corporate funds, fraud. The investigation his anonymous tip had triggered had uncovered more than Grant had even known about. Apparently, Dana and Trevor had been running their scheme for over a year, cycling fake consulting expenses through multiple companies, splitting the money through accounts hidden in Trevor's name. The total amount was just under $90,000. Grant sat in his office and thought about that number. $90,000. Not enough to be worth destroying a life over, but enough to show Dana had been willing to risk everything for relatively small gains. That told him everything about who she'd become. Dana called him from jail. He almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of him. Grant. Her voice was rough, broken. Please. I need help. No. Please. They're saying I stole money. They're saying I could go to prison. You did steal money, and you probably will go to prison. I didn't. We weren't. Grant, please, you know me. You know I wouldn't. I don't know you at all, Grant said. I thought I did. I was wrong. Dana was crying now, full sobs that distorted her words. I'm sorry. God, Grant, I'm so sorry. I never meant for any of this to happen. Yes, you did. You planned it. You executed it. You just didn't mean to get caught. Please help me. I'll do anything. I'll tell the court the truth about everything. You'll tell the truth regardless. You don't have a choice anymore. Grant. He hung up. She called back 4 times. He blocked the number. The trial took 8 months to prepare. Grant wasn't directly involved, but his documentation became central evidence. Every text message, every falsified expense, every piece of the puzzle he'd carefully assembled. The prosecutor called him once to thank him. Without your records, we wouldn't have had a case, she said. Most people don't document things this thoroughly. I like things to be accurate, Grant said. The prosecutor laughed. Clearly, Dana's attorney tried to negotiate a plea deal. The prosecutor offered 3 years in prison plus restitution. Dana refused. She wanted to go to trial, to tell her story, to convince a jury that Grant had somehow orchestrated everything. Grant almost felt sorry for her. Almost. The trial lasted 2 weeks. Grant attended every day, sitting in the back of the courtroom, watching Dana try to explain away evidence that explained itself. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty on all counts. Dana collapsed when the verdict was read. Her attorney had to help her back in her chair. She looked across the courtroom at Grant, her expression a mixture of hatred and desperation. Grant met her eyes and didn't look away. Sentencing was scheduled for 6 weeks later. In the interim, Dana was released on bail, required to wear an ankle monitor, forbidden from leaving the county. She tried to contact Grant one more time. Not by phone, not by email. She showed up at the house. Grant heard the doorbell and checked the security camera he'd installed months ago. Dana stood on the porch, looking smaller than he remembered. Thinner. Her hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail. She wore jeans and a sweatshirt, the kind of clothes she used to wear on lazy Sunday mornings when they'd read the paper together and argued about politics. Grant opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "I need to talk to you," Dana said. "You can't be here. There's a restraining order." "I know. I'm violating it." "I don't care." She looked up at him, eyes red from crying. "Please, 5 minutes." Grant considered calling the police, but he was curious what she'd say, what explanation she could possibly offer at this point. "5 minutes," he said. "Out here." Dana nodded. She wrapped her arms around herself, even though it wasn't cold. "I loved you." "No, I did. I know you don't believe me, but I did. You were good to me. You gave me stability and support and everything I said I wanted. And then you stole from me. I was scared." Dana's voice cracked. "You don't understand what it was like. Everyone at work climbing over each other, fighting for recognition, and I was drowning. I couldn't keep up. Trevor made me feel like I was winning again. By committing fraud. By having something that was mine. Something you didn't control or manage or fix for me." She wiped her eyes. "I know that sounds crazy. I know it doesn't make sense. But I felt so small next to you, Grant. You were always so calm, so rational, so perfect. And I was just struggling." Grant listened. He didn't interrupt. This was the most honest Dana had been in years. "I made terrible choices," she continued. "I know that. I destroyed everything. But what you did in response," she shook her head, "you destroyed my entire life. My career, my reputation, everything." "I didn't destroy anything," Grant said. "You built a house on a foundation of lies. I just stopped holding it up." Dana laughed, bitter and broken. "You really believe that? It's true. You're the most dangerous kind of person, Grant. You're cruel and you call it justice. I'm accountable, and I expect others to be the same." "No." Dana stepped closer. "You're ruthless. You tore apart two people's lives because you were angry." "I was disappointed," Grant corrected. "Anger is temporary. Disappointment is permanent." Dana stared at him. "I'm going to prison. Did you know that? 3 to 5 years. I'll be almost 40 when I get out. No career. No reputation. Nothing. That's what happens when you break the law. That's what happens when you cross Grant Holloway." Grant didn't respond. There was nothing to say. Dana had made her choices. He'd made his. The consequences were what they were. "I asked to see you because I wanted you to know something," Dana said finally. "I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. Not because it matters. Not because it changes anything. But because it's true. I'm sorry I hurt you. I'm sorry I lied. I'm sorry I destroyed what we had." Grant nodded once. "Okay. That's it. Just okay. What do you want me to say, Dana? That I forgive you? That we can move past this?" "We can't. You made sure of that. You made sure of it too. You didn't have to go after me like this. You didn't have to destroy every piece of my life." "Yes," Grant said. "I did. Because if I didn't, you'd do it again. To someone else. In some other way. People like you don't learn unless the consequences are undeniable." Dana's expression shifted. The sadness drained away, replaced by something colder. "I hope you're happy, Grant. I hope this perfect justice of yours keeps you warm at night." "It does." She turned and walked back to her car. Grant watched her drive away, then closed the door and locked it. He didn't feel victorious. He didn't feel sad. He felt finished. Trevor Mallory declared bankruptcy 11 months after Grant had sent the documentation to North Point Distribution. Grant learned about it from a public records search he ran occasionally, the way someone might check weather forecasts, not because they needed to, but because it was good to know. The bankruptcy filing listed debts totaling nearly $200,000. Legal fees from fighting his termination. Credit card debt accumulated during unemployment. A second mortgage on a condo he couldn't sell in the current market. Trevor had tried to rebuild, tried to pivot into consulting, tried to leverage his network. But networks dissolve when trust evaporates. Grant read the filing once, noted the details, then closed the browser tab. Trevor had been an architect of his own destruction. Grant had simply made sure the foundation was examined properly. Dana's sentencing hearing was held on a gray Tuesday in November. Grant attended, sitting in the same back row seat he'd occupied during the trial. The courtroom was less crowded this time. Just Dana, her attorney, the prosecutor, a few reporters, and Grant. Dana wore a dark suit, hair pulled back, makeup minimal. She looked like she was going to a funeral. In a way, she was. The judge reviewed the case file. Dana had been convicted of fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying business records. The maximum sentence was 7 years. The prosecution had recommended 4. Dana's attorney made a plea for leniency. She talked about Dana's previously clean record, her contributions to her company before the illegal activity, her remorse and willingness to make restitution. The prosecutor countered with the systematic nature of the fraud, the breach of trust, the calculated deception that had lasted over a year. The judge listened to everything. Then she turned to Dana. "Ms. Holloway, do you have anything to say before I impose sentencing?" Dana stood. Her hands were shaking. "Your Honor, I know what I did was wrong. I know I broke the law and betrayed the trust of my employer and my colleagues. I don't have an excuse. I made terrible choices, and I take full responsibility for them." She paused, collecting herself. "But I want the court to understand that I'm not a criminal. I'm someone who made mistakes under pressure, who got involved in something I couldn't control." "Ms. Holloway," the judge interrupted, "you systematically defrauded your employer of $90,000 over 18 months. That's not a mistake. That's a pattern of intentional criminal conduct." Dana's face crumpled. "I know. I'm sorry." The judge looked down at her papers. "I've reviewed your case thoroughly. I've considered the arguments from both sides. I'm sentencing you to 4 years in a federal correctional facility, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You'll also be required to pay full restitution to your former employer, plus fines and court costs totaling $120,000. Dana sat down hard. Her attorney put a hand on her shoulder. "You'll report to the facility designated by the Bureau of Prisons no later than January 15th, the judge continued. "Do you understand?" "Yes, Your Honor," Dana whispered. The hearing ended. Dana was led out by a bailiff. She looked back once, scanning the courtroom. Her eyes found Grant. He didn't look away, didn't smile, didn't frown, just held her gaze until she turned and disappeared through the door. Grant walked out of the courthouse into cold air and gray sky. His breath fogged in front of him. The parking lot was mostly empty. Somewhere behind him, reporters were probably trying to get a quote from Dana's attorney. Grant got in his car and drove home. The house was quiet when he arrived. It was always quiet now. He'd sold most of the furniture Dana had picked out, replaced it with simpler pieces. Functional, comfortable he'd repainted the living room, refinished the hardwood floors himself, installed new light fixtures. The house had been theirs. Now it was his. He made coffee and sat at the kitchen table with his laptop. He had worked to finish quarterly reports, budget projections, numbers that balanced, ledgers that closed properly. His phone buzzed. A text from his attorney. "Heard about the sentencing. For years. How are you feeling?" Grant typed back, "Fine," which was true. He felt fine. Not triumphant. Not vengeful. Just settled. Justice didn't require emotion. It required action and follow through. 2 months later, Grant legally changed his name. Not because he was hiding, but because Grant Holloway was attached to Dana, to the divorce, to a version of his life that had ended. He chose something simple, something that meant nothing to anyone but him. The paperwork took 6 weeks. When the court approved it, Grant spent a weekend updating everything: driver's license, bank accounts, work records, credit cards. It was tedious, bureaucratic, exactly the kind of task Grant excelled at. When he was finished, he drove north. He'd found a property 3 months earlier while browsing real estate listings on a Saturday afternoon. A small house on a lake in northern Michigan. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a dock that extended into water so clear you could see the rocks on the bottom. The listing price was reasonable. The location was remote. Grant bought it without visiting, using proceeds from selling the house in Maple Glen. Now he drove there for the first time. 6 hours north, through small towns and empty highways, until the landscape changed and the air smelled like pine and fresh water. The house was exactly what the photos had shown. Modest, clean, surrounded by trees. The lake stretched out behind it, flat and calm. Grant parked and walked down to the dock. The wood was weathered but solid. He sat at the edge and watched the water. There were no neighbors close enough to wave at. No one who knew his history. No one who'd ask questions about where he came from or why he was here. Just quiet. Grant sat there until the sun set, turning the water gold and then gray and then black. The first few months in the new house were an adjustment. Grant worked remotely now. His company had offered him a permanent work-from-home position after he'd explained he was relocating for personal reasons. The pay was the same. The expectations were the same. Just a different view outside his office window. He established a routine. Coffee at dawn. Work until noon. Lunch on the dock. More work until evening. Dinner, reading, sleep. On weekends, he explored the area. There was a town 15 miles away with a grocery store, a hardware shop, a diner. The locals were friendly, but not intrusive. They didn't ask about his past. He didn't volunteer it. Grant bought a kayak and spent evenings paddling across the lake. The water was cold, even in summer, fed by underground springs. He'd read somewhere that cold water was good for the mind, that it forced you to stay present. He didn't know if that was true, but he liked the way it felt. Sometimes, late at night, Grant thought about Dana. Not with regret, not with guilt, just curiosity about what her life looked like now. Whether she'd adapted to prison. Whether she understood yet why things had ended the way they did. He imagined her in some cell, sharing space with people who'd made similar choices. He imagined her working in the prison library, or the cafeteria, or wherever they assigned her. He imagined her counting days, calculating her release date, planning what came after. He hoped she'd learn something, but he doubted it. People who blamed others for their consequences rarely learned anything except how to refine their excuses. 1 year after moving to Michigan, Grant received a letter forwarded from his old address. The handwriting on the envelope was familiar. Dana. Grant opened it standing at his mailbox, 100 yards from his house. The letter was short. Grant, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you even live at this address anymore. But I needed to write it anyway. I've had a lot of time to think in here. About what I did. About why I did it. About what I've lost. You were right. About everything. I did betray you. I did steal. I did destroy what we had. And I blamed you for not stopping me, which was the most cowardly thing I could have done. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I want you to know that I understand now. You didn't destroy my life. I did. You just refused to enable it. I have 2 more years left in here. When I get out, I'm going to try to rebuild. Not into who I was, but into someone better. Someone honest. I hope you found peace. You deserved it more than I ever did. Dana. Grant read the letter twice. Then he walked back to his house and placed it in a folder with other documents from that period of his life. Evidence of something that had happened and ended. He didn't write back. People sometimes asked Grant if he had regrets. The few friends he'd maintained, the occasional work colleague who got personal over video calls. He always said no, which was true. Regret implied you'd do something differently if given the chance. Grant wouldn't. Every decision he'd made had been necessary. Every action had been justified by the circumstance that preceded it. Dana had chosen deception. Trevor had chosen theft. Grant had chosen accountability. The consequences were simply what happened when actions met reality. 2 years after moving to Michigan, Grant started dating someone new. Her name was Rachel. She taught high school English in the town 15 miles away. They'd met at the hardware store, Grant buying lumber, Rachel buying paint for her classroom. She asked him about his life. He told her the truth. Not all of it, not immediately, but enough that she understood he'd been married before, that it had ended badly, that he'd moved north to start fresh. Rachel didn't pry. She didn't ask for details. She accepted what he offered and built from there. Their relationship developed slowly. Dinner once a week. Weekend hikes. Quiet evenings reading on the dock. Rachel had her own apartment, her own life, her own routines. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her, just someone to share time with. Grant liked that about her. He liked that she didn't need him to be anything other than what he was. 3 years after Dana's sentencing, Grant received another letter, this time from Trevor Mallory. He almost didn't open it, but curiosity won again. Grant, I don't expect you to care, but I thought you should know I finally understand what you did and why you did it. I spent 2 years blaming you for destroying my career, telling myself you were vindictive, that you'd overreacted, that Dana and I had just made a mistake. But I was lying to myself. We didn't make a mistake. We planned fraud. We executed it. We got caught. And you made sure the consequences stuck. I'm working construction now. Manual labor. It's honest work, which is more than I can say for what I was doing before. I'm rebuilding my credit, seeing a therapist, trying to become someone I can actually respect. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I just wanted you to know that you were right. And I was wrong. Trevor. Grant set the letter aside. He felt nothing about it. No vindication. No satisfaction. Trevor's revelation changed nothing because the outcome had never depended on Trevor understanding it. Justice didn't require the guilty to comprehend their punishment. It just required the punishment to occur. For years after moving to Michigan, Grant married Rachel. It was a small ceremony. Just them, an officiant, and 2 friends as witnesses. They signed papers on the dock behind Grant's house, with the lake spreading out behind them. Rachel wore a simple dress. Grant wore khakis and a button-down shirt. There were no grand declarations, no emotional speeches. Just 2 people agreeing to build something together, with honesty as the foundation. After the ceremony, they ate dinner at the diner in town. The owner gave them free pie. People congratulated them without knowing anything about them beyond the fact that they seemed happy. Grant was happy, not the loud, exuberant kind, just the quiet contentment of someone who'd walked through fire and come out the other side with clarity about what mattered. Rachel understood that. She'd had her own difficult past, a marriage that ended in divorce, a period of depression, a slow rebuilding process. She didn't expect perfection from Grant. She expected honesty, effort, presence. He gave her all 3. 5 years after Dana's sentencing, Grant received a final letter. Dana had been released from prison 3 months early for good behavior. She'd served her time, paid her restitution, completed every required program. Now she was out, living with her sister in Pennsylvania, working as a bookkeeper for a small nonprofit. Her letter was different this time. Shorter, simpler. Grant, I'm out. I'm rebuilding. I'm sober, employed, and trying to live honestly. I don't expect anything from you, but I wanted to say thank you. You held me accountable when no one else would. You refused to let me pretend my actions didn't have consequences. And as much as I hated you for it, you were right. I'm not the person I was. I'll never be her again. And that's because you didn't let me get away with it. I hope you're well. I hope you found what you were looking for. Dana. Grant read the letter on the dock. Early morning, coffee steaming beside him. Rachel was still asleep in the house. The lake was glass smooth, reflecting clouds. He thought about Dana, young, ambitious, hungry, and the woman she'd become. He thought about Trevor, rebuilding from bankruptcy. He thought about the people they might be now, compared to who they'd been. Then he thought about himself. He wasn't the same person either. The marriage to Dana had taught him things he'd needed to learn. About trust, about boundaries, about the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. He'd learned that kindness without accountability wasn't kindness at all. It was cowardice disguised as compassion. Grant folded Dana's letter and put it in his pocket. Then he went inside, made breakfast for Rachel, and started his day. People who didn't know Grant's story sometimes assumed he was cold. They saw his calm, his logic, his unwillingness to compromise on principles, and they mistook it for a lack of emotion. They were wrong. Grant felt everything. He just didn't let feelings dictate actions. When Dana had betrayed him, he'd felt the sting of it, the hurt, the anger, the disbelief that someone he'd trusted could look him in the eye and lie for months. But he'd also recognized that those feelings were temporary. Pain faded. Anger cooled. What remained was the choice of how to respond. Grant had chosen truth and consequences. Not because he was heartless, but because he understood that real care sometimes meant letting people face the full weight of what they'd done. Dana had needed to fall, completely, without a net. Only then could she rebuild into something authentic. Grant had given her that gift, even though she'd hated him for it. 7 years after moving to Michigan, Grant stood on his dock at sunset. Rachel was beside him, her hand in his. They watched the sky turn orange and purple and deep blue. "Do you ever think about your ex-wife?" Rachel asked. She'd learned the broad strokes of the story over the years, enough to understand the context. "Sometimes," Grant said. "Do you regret how it ended?" Grant thought about the question. Did he regret it? "No," he said. "I regret that it had to end that way. But I don't regret doing what was necessary." Rachel nodded. "You're a good man, Grant. You know that." He smiled slightly. "I'm a fair man. That's different." "It's better," Rachel said. They stood there until the stars appeared, tiny points of light against the darkening sky. Grant had built a new life, not by forgetting the old one, but by learning from it. He'd taken the lessons Dana had taught him about vigilance, about boundaries, about the importance of matching actions to values, and he'd applied them to everything that came after. He didn't hate Dana. He didn't hate Trevor. He simply didn't think about them unless reminded. And when he did think about them, he felt the same thing he'd felt in that courtroom, watching Dana receive her sentence. Completion. Some people call what Grant did revenge. Grant called it consequences. The difference mattered. Revenge was emotional. It was about hurting someone because they'd hurt you. It was about satisfaction derived from their pain. Consequences were logical. They were about ensuring actions aligned with outcomes, about maintaining systems where truth and accountability mattered. Grant had never wanted Dana or Trevor to suffer. He'd wanted them to face reality. There was no pleasure in it, no victory, just the simple recognition that the world worked better when people couldn't escape the results of their choices. And that recognition let him sleep peacefully every single night. Grant woke before dawn most mornings now. He'd slip out of bed without waking Rachel, make coffee, and walk down to the dock. The lake was quietest in those early hours, before wind disturbed the surface, before boats churned the water. He'd sit with his coffee and watch the sky lighten, thinking about nothing in particular. Sometimes he thought about the future, the life he and Rachel were building, the possibility of children someday, the work he still found meaningful even in its simplicity. Sometimes he thought about the past, not with longing or regret, but with the same calm assessment he'd bring to a financial report. Here's what happened. Here's why it happened. Here's what was learned. Mostly, though, he just sat, peaceful, complete, exactly where he needed to be.